In faith and unity, where the bonds of peace, of acceptance and love, are the fruit of His presence here among us. So with one voice we'll sing to the Lord, and with one voice we'll lift out His word, till the whole earth sees the Redeemer has come, for He dwells in the presence of His people. Oh, how good it is on this journey we share, to rejoice with the happy and weep with those who mourn. For the weak find strength, the afflicted find grace, when we offer the blessing of belonging. So with one voice we'll sing to the Lord, and with one voice we'll lift out His word, till the whole earth sees the Redeemer has come, for He dwells in the presence of His people. Oh, how good it is to embrace His command, to prefer one another, forgive as He forgives. When we live as one, we all share in the love of the Son with the Father and the Spirit. So with one voice we'll sing to the Lord, and with one voice we'll lift out His word, till the whole earth sees the Redeemer has come, for He dwells in the presence of His people. So with one voice we'll sing to the Lord, and with one voice we'll lift out His word, till the whole earth sees the Redeemer has come, for He dwells in the presence of His people. For He dwells in the presence of His people. The law of the Lord is perfect, converting the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. More to be desired are they than gold, yea, than much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey, and the honeycomb. The statutes of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. More to be desired are they than gold, yea, than much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey, and the honeycomb. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, yea, than much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey, and the honeycomb. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be accepted in Thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. More to be desired are they than gold, yea, than much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey, and the honeycomb. And in keeping of them there is grace. you're my hope and stay. Lord, I need you, oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness, oh God, how I need you. Spirit, in faith and unity, where the bonds of peace, of acceptance and love are the fruit of His presence here among us. So with one voice we'll sing to the Lord, and with one voice we'll lift out His word till the whole earth sees the Redeemer has come, for He dwells in the presence of His people. Oh, how good it is on this journey we share to rejoice with the happy and weep with those who mourn. For the weak find strength, the afflicted find grace when we offer the blessing of belong.
And it wasn't the sugar that made me stop that. I just had visions of kids falling down with those dum-dums in their mouth, shoving them down their throats and choking. So I thought, I don't do that no more. Yeah, it is. It is a dumb name. Okay. Okay, we're on the air. We're good to go. Ready to go. Who's my song leader? Good evening. Thank you, James. It's good to see everyone here this evening, especially if you're visiting with us. Thank you so much for being here this evening. We do want to begin this evening by making just a few announcements and also mentioning some folks who are in need of prayer. After we do that, we're going to be having a couple of songs and a prayer, and then we'll dismiss to our Bible classes. But all of our adults are in here for our summer series, and Steve Godrow will be teaching this evening. We always look forward to Steve leading the class, and he'll be talking, I think, Luke 16, the unrighteous steward. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, is he an unrighteous steward or a Beltway insider? I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. We do want to make a few announcements, though, and keep some folks in prayer. I want to begin with our expectant mothers. Let's not forget Megan and Jessica, Megan White, Jessica Avery, both due next month. Nydia Pineda Mesa delivered twins yesterday. They're a boy and a girl, Jacob and Camilla. We don't have weights, but, you know, they're about like. But anyway, so we do want to rejoice at the birth of those two infants. And don't forget Karen Martinez either, who's on our list of expectant mothers. Let's not forget we have a whole lot of people fighting cancer, being currently treated for and tested for cancer. Let's not forget to be praying for Wes Ray. He was to have started radiation treatment this week, but had an issue with a knee and tripped to the emergency room, so he'll begin that next week. Let's not forget Tina Caffey and Foster Caffey, Phil Taylor, Ed Work, and so many others who are fighting cancer, and others that we've been praying for, Masha Zhivitova. Let's not forget Cindy Welch, Jim Webster, who has a host of medical issues, and there's so many other names. Do consult your announcements from tonight for a fuller listing. Just some upcoming events. Youth group, $20 day tomorrow, and that's from 10 to 2, so we're looking forward to that. There'll be a Manassas Kids Day Camp. The theme is Friendship Day. Love your neighbor. That's on Friday from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m., and that's for all youngsters 2 years old to 6th grade. Bring a packed lunch and a water bottle with names on both of them. And there's a sign up on the bulletin board. You can contact Jessica Avery if you need more details. There'll be volleyball Saturday night. Young adults have a lunch and game day on Sunday. The youth group devotional Sunday evening after services is a special devotional because we're going to be honoring and saying goodbye to our 3 summer interns. We've had a wonderful summer and 3 great interns this summer, and we want to take the time to thank them. And so we did want to mention that to you. And then on the 8th, Tuesday the 8th, is our youth group trip to King's Dominion. Details are on a sign-up sheet on the youth group bulletin board. You need to sign up by Sunday. You need to sign up by Sunday if you're intending to go on that trip. There are certain things that we're looking ahead to. Home Builders and Youth Group event on the 12th. Another day camp on the 18th, Manassas Kids Day Camp. The congregational retreat was announced last Sunday. It's the weekend of September 29th through October the 1st, so mark your calendars for that. Two other things on your announcements I want to draw your attention to. Our back-to-school supplies that we're collecting for Cougar Elementary. We're going to be doing that for a few more weeks. And there's a list of items that we need in your announcements. And we're collecting those in the tubs in the foyer there near the office. And then also, there's an announcement about receiving items for our future Dorcas Day and how you can bring those items later in the month. So there are details about that in your announcements from tonight, too. Okay. If we have no other announcements, let's lift our voices together and sing praise to God.
You were given the cue that there were multiple songs. There's only one tonight, but that's all right. Let's praise God. Every time I kneel to pray, I open up my heart to the Lord. Every time I close my eyes, I feel the sweet embrace of my Lord. But I don't know why so many things seem to get in the way of seeing my God's glory, but I try every day to see Him and to thank Him for all the things He's given me. Every time I see a child, I see the gentleness of my Every time I watch a storm, I know the awesome power of
In Luke, the 16th chapter, he says, "Let the little children come unto me." And when we sing this song, it's awesome that it talks about the children, and then it talks about the storm, and you think about Jesus getting up and going, "Shh." So take a second and listen to the little children before we get quiet before our God, because they are who we're supposed to be. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, make us little children. Make us obedient storms. Make us your light in this world. Help us to know that we serve a risen King, that you have already won the victory. And we're just trying to bring more to that understanding to bring home with us as our brothers and sisters. Help us as we come together tonight, that we recharge our batteries, that we get ourselves strengthened from our fellowship with each other, that we recharge ourselves and we're ready to go out into another day and the rest of the week to win souls for you. Help us to take the words that will be spoken tonight in our classes, to apply them to our hearts and have your seeds grow in our hearts and strengthen us. Help us to be reminded of whose we are and be ready to give an account to anybody that asks why we are yours. Dear Father, we have many that are sick, many that are dealing with cancer. We have many that are dealing with various ailments, but we know you're the great physician. We ask that you take cancer away. We ask as your little children to please remove that from this world, but your will be done. We ask that you will bless the ones that are under physicians' cares and give those people that are helping them to mend and to get better, to give them the knowledge and the strength and the capabilities to do their job well and help those of our loved ones to get better. Thank you so much for the little children. Thank you for the reminder that they are to us. Bless the expectant mothers as they are getting ready to bring more children into this world. Give them the strength and the energy to be able to endure the last months, being ready to deliver those children. Once they are here, help us to surround them with love. Give them the nurture that is the fellowship of being around your children. Help those that are ministering to different people in foreign lands, our missionaries and the ones that are living in foreign lands, that you will help them to be safe, spread your word. Help us as we spread your word here, that we can plant seeds or water or reap the harvest, whatever lot you would give to us. Watch over us and guide us in all that we do. Use us as your servants here upon this earth. Wear us out in your service. Bring us home to be with you. All these things we pray in your Son's name. Amen.
At least my name isn't Tony. The who? Were you one? You did it.
I apologize for stepping on your words this morning when you were trying to say something, and I was like, I'm so happy that Peter said I wrote this all down.
No, I don't think you were stepping. I think it's good when people make comments.
Yeah, well, you weren't done your sentence, and I was jumping in.
Oh, well. That's all right.
That's what happens when you're the second out of 5 kids.
It's competition. So I instinctively went right to Peter. Let me get in the right book. You know, this past Sunday morning, I got up and the first thing I said was, it's good to see everybody here on this Wednesday morning. Yeah. And I said, man, I'm Already on the wrong foot. Here we go. Okay, I was looking for it and I got the... See, this is old age in progress right here. Noah, my grandson asked me something about old age the other day and trying to compare me to how old I was. And I said, well, I'll tell you how old I am. I said, you know what an emergency brake is, right, Noah? He says, yeah. I said, what's an emergency brake? He says, well, that's the brake everybody puts on when the car's stopped. And I said, see, when I was a kid, an emergency brake was there to use when your brakes failed, which back then was more times than we would like to think. This is even where I had a couple models of the older relatives who didn't even have disc brakes yet. They had the old drum brakes, and the only thing between your foot and that back tire was a cable, you know? And when that cable snapped, you better have an emergency brake. Am I right? I don't mean to point to you, Jairus. I'm just getting a little validation into my old age experience here, that's all. But I saw it on a rewind once. Yeah, okay, that works. Oh, yeah. If you're a real hot dog, even on not snow, you can rev up your fast little cars and hit that thing and make the back end swerve. And I'll never get hurt that way. But that happened to my sister. She was a young girl and was driving down a hill in Weirton, West Virginia. And the brakes just snapped and failed. And the emergency brake helped a little, but not a lot, because they're going down a steep hill, and the only thing they could do is run it up on a hillside and try to stop it that way. So anyway, there you go. Saw it on a rerun. Tonight we are talking about the unrighteous steward. It goes by other names, but we'll stick with the unrighteous steward. And like Barry said, you can compare it to an inside beltway trader if you want, but this is certainly a person whose judgment and actions we're going to question. But I need to run this proviso before I start. This is one of those proverbs that generate a lot of discussion, a lot of questions. We're going to see that as we get into the middle of it. And I fear that if we do a lot of that with the size crowd we got tonight, I'll never get to the end of this class. So I'm going to ask this. First time I've ever asked this. I usually like the comments because it gives me a break. I get to read ahead a little more. Let me plow through this. Write down your notes. Write down your questions. And Lord willing, we'll have time left on the clock, and we'll talk about some of this stuff because it's important to talk about. You can email me afterwards, and if you're watching online, the email is bbryson@outlook. This is the unrighteous steward. This is, for me, or for my purposes tonight, verses 1 through 13, all the way through 13. This is unique. This parable is unique for a couple reasons. Number one, it's only found in Luke. You won't find this parable in the other Gospels. Luke is a longer gospel, and it's the only one where you're going to find this. So at least if you learn nothing else, somebody makes reference to the unrighteous steward, you'll be able to say, oh yeah, that's in the Gospel of Luke, and you'll be right. It follows the parable of the prodigal son. Previous to that, both deal with wealth, both deal with the desire for money and the risk of wanting money. And in this case, the steward offers a very unique perspective with regard to that. So that's what we're going to see. This parable starts and ends with events and conclusions that are very easy to understand. We can read them and understand them. They make sense to us. But it's the middle of this parable that requires a little unpacking. There's some verses in there, some language in there, I guess we would say, that's kind of challenging. And we're going to talk about that. It may very well be in the original language that when somebody said this, when Jesus said this to the disciples, whether it was in Greek or Aramaic, that they knew exactly what he said right away. You know, certainly we have things that we say in our culture today that if we wrote down and sent back 1,000 years in time to the brothers back then, they'd be scratching their head for hours wondering what we're talking about. May have been easier for them, I don't know. But certainly something that we can understand, and that's what we're going to do. Either way, it's left for us to do just that. So we're going to read it, we're going to talk about it, at the end, and then see how, more specifically, how we can make this apply to our lives. And Mel, I just wanted to point out, I'm already in the framework of that childlike position because I brought my elementary school composition book with me. All right, let's read this. Luke 16, 1 through 13. Now he was also saying to the disciples, there was a certain rich man who had a steward, and this steward was reported to him as squandering his possessions. And he called him and said to him, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your stewardship, for you can no longer be a steward. And the steward said to himself, what shall I do, since my master is taking my stewardship from me? I am not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I shall do, so that when I am removed from this stewardship, they will receive me into their homes. And he summoned each one of his master's debtors, and he began saying to the first, how much do you owe my master? And he said, 100 measures of oil. And he said to him, take your bill, and sit down and quickly write 50. And he said to another, how much do you owe? And he said, 100 measures of wheat. And he said to him, take your bill and write 80. And his master praised the unrighteous steward because he had acted shrewdly. For the sons of this age are more shrewd in relation to their own kind than the sons of light. And I say to you, make friends for yourselves by means of the mammon of unrighteousness, that when it fails, they may receive you into eternal dwellings. He who is faithful in very little thing is faithful in much also, and he who is unrighteous in a very little thing is unrighteous also in much. If therefore you have not been faithful in the use of unrighteous mammon, who will entrust the true riches to you? And if you have, and if you have not been faithful in the use of that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? No servant can serve two masters, for he will either hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. That last verse we're all very familiar with. In these first two verses, first we remind ourselves that he's not talking just to his disciples. His audience is both the disciples and the Jewish brain trust that are sitting in the background listening. And to whom after this parable, when he goes to the next parable, he'll be talking to directly. So he's teaching his disciples, but the Pharisees and the scribes are all kind of listening in to see what he has to say, to be able to argue with him later. In this parable, Jesus introduces us to a wealthy man or a rich man that has a steward. A steward we have to describe as a house manager, probably a house accountant. He was responsible for a lot of things. In fact, if we go back earlier in Luke's gospel, Luke tells us a little more about what a steward does. And you can look this up later, but it's in Luke chapter 12. It's in verses 42 through 44, where Luke says more insight to being a steward was that he suggested he was also responsible for all the staff and all the other servants. So he had a greater responsibility. He was in charge of all the affairs of the house, Luke says, and of all the possessions. He probably wore a signet ring that he had authority to stamp to get things done. He was a businessman. He was out in town among the other people doing business, although unrighteously. This was a busy man. He had a lot of responsibility. Makes us mindful of, and I'll ask you this, makes us mindful of the responsibility of who else in the Old Testament? Who? Joseph. This is kind of the responsibility Joseph had towards Potiphar. I mean, he ran the house. Short of his wife, he had everything in control of everything else. So in a position like this, I guess we appreciate the fact that two things are present. One is an immense trust that is necessary to give somebody that kind of responsibility. The other is the risk that you impose by giving somebody that responsibility. And this all kind of plays into the parable. In any event, his crime is basically skimming from the top, spending and buying things that aren't his to spend or buy, and conducting business that would otherwise not be permitted by his master. It uses the word, my verse uses the word squandering. He was squandering what he had for his master. Squandering is defined as wasting or misusing goods with malice. Or sometimes we heard, in terms of malice, we hear it put, wasting or misusing goods with malice of forethought. Not only was he doing this, he planned it, and he's been planning it every day since. So he's not doing right by his master. The accusation, we find out, was something that he didn't discover, but was reported to him. And when you think about that, that's probably for only one of two reasons. Either one, there's a jealous servant out there who's not getting part of the cut, and so he's going to turn him in. Or it could have just been somebody, and again, we want to keep this in perspective because this is a parable, but you do like to kind of walk the dog through how this might really play out. The other person that might have turned him in was somebody who was very faithful to the master, found out what he was doing and turned him in. Either way, what happens is the master hears of it and basically calls him on the carpet. That's a military term, but basically calls him up for judgment to find out what he's been doing. And he says to him, and what's interesting also is the steward in this case, in this parable, he doesn't offer any immediate defense. He goes right to the what's next mode. It's almost I shouldn't say almost, someone in this position would have known this is coming eventually. I'm going to get caught. Maybe he just didn't think it was going to happen this fast because he did have to start thinking on his feet a little bit. Caught short in the sense of saying what's next, but still has to think something through. And the master, of course, says, give an account. Explain yourself. Give an account can mean simply as much as, I've heard this, now you tell me what's going on before I fire you. Or the give an account can mean, now go out there, if you want your last paycheck, go out there and tell me what I really have, and then when that's done, you're fired. Either way, he has that communication with him. The steward does not try to defend himself whatsoever. He just goes right into the what do I have to do next mode. Verses 3 and 4, he says to himself, basically, confronted with his now new future, he says to himself, well, what am I going to do? He's actually sitting there and he's pondering it in his mind. What am I going to do next? He says, I'm too weak to dig and too proud to beg. That's probably an overstatement. He's probably not too weak to dig per se, but digging back in those days, back in that era, was a lot of hard work. You were either digging a well, or you were digging a ditch or ditches for the farm, or you were digging to put crops down. Not so much he's too weak to do one act of digging. He just didn't see himself doing that for a living for the rest of his life, and he says, I'm just not going to do it. He's too weak to dig in that regard, and too proud to beg. For all that they had going on back in maybe that era, and we read about their culture, begging just was not something that you wanted to do unless you absolutely had to do it. In fact, I found one of the earlier writers, Jewish writers of that time wrote, and he quoted this, better to die than to beg. So the man just had to find something else to do, and he kind of probably figured that he was in a position smart enough to find out a way to do it, and that's what he does. Then the light bulb comes on in those two verses. He says, I know what I'm going to do. And he doesn't explain it right there in verses 3 and 4. That's coming. But he basically comes up with the idea that I'm going to go back to the people that I was doing business with, back to the people I was cheating, and I'm going to do something for them that's going to make them welcome me into their homes. Now, if you had told me that up front, I'd have said, good luck with that. Have fun going out to those people. They're going to hang you instead of wanting you into their houses. So if you only get that far, it doesn't seem to make any sense what he's saying he's going to do. But he's got it in his mind of what he's going to do, and so he pushes forward. In verses 5 and 7, we're talking about how he summed all his master's debtors together. The time element is not clear on this because it seems like he's still interacting a little bit with these people, even though he's got the word that he's been fired. Maybe they don't know what's happening yet. Maybe it doesn't matter that they know what's happening yet. But he's back out there with these people that he's been dealing with to keep the interaction and the business with them going. So now in these two verses, 5 or 7, his plan is unveiled. His strategy is, he's been shrewd up to this point. His strategy is to continue to be shrewd. And that's what he does. He makes friends by cutting a deal with the people that he was doing business with. You provide me room and board, and I'm going to start giving you anywhere from 20 to 50% off on everything you buy. And again, that to me is interesting because I don't know how he's doing that. I don't know if he's still continuing to cheat the master before he fires him, or whether he's just pocketing the money. I don't know. And it doesn't matter because he's achieving what he wants. He's making all these people happy that they're getting everything that they need for less money. And the master is about to find that out, actually. And so he says, for 100 measures of oil, you only got to pay for 50, if I'm reading this right. And if you want 100 measures of wheat, I'm only going to charge you for 80 measures of wheat. Great deals for people who didn't have a lot of money. Obviously, this is not a practice that he can sustain. The master's going to find out, and he does. But it doesn't matter because he's already accomplished the mission. He's already made friends with these people. They did something for me. I'm going to take them under my roof. Friends forever. He doesn't have to worry about anything anymore. So, smart maneuver, I guess, in one sense. And we're going to see that his master kind of sees it the same way. So anyway, he's using his shrewdness so that even when the business is done, he's still going to be a friend with these people as the parable goes. Verse 8 is where things start to get intriguing, and we're going to read this. It says, "And his master praised the unrighteous steward because he acted shrewdly. For the sons of this age are more shrewd in their relationship to their own kind than the sons of light." That is an understandable text, but I couldn't do it without sitting and thinking a minute. You know, I'd almost be saying to someone, say that again. I mean, I think I understand it, but say it again so that we're really clear about what he's saying. The unrighteous steward who fired the unrighteous steward who was fired by his master is now in this parable being praised by his master, which is interesting. Something that we wouldn't think. And maybe in a real context, maybe in an actual context, or let me just say if I was the master, I wouldn't be praising this guy. I'd be going after him with a pitchfork. But in terms to teach us, Jesus saying what he said was, wow, that was really smart. I mean, the master here is impressed with what he did with his shrewdness on how he made himself comfortable. Not unsurprisingly, the master figures this out, of course, and like I said, instead of chastising him, he applauds him for his shrewdness. At which time Jesus points out directly to his disciples when he says, "The children of this world are more shrewd in handling worldly things than you are handling spiritual things." And if we think about that a little bit, like I said, it starts to make sense. You got people out there, and the reference here specifically is to wealth and to money, but we could put a lot of other things in there. But he's basically saying you've got people who are not of the faith that are really working shrewdly with the wealth that they have, like this unrighteous steward, and with the other things of the world they had. If you were that shrewd in doing this for the faith as sons of light, you'd be in a much better situation. That sentence makes sense. Okay, go ahead. I know you and I love you. Go ahead. Did she yell at you? Okay. We'll get to you. Because you got good comments. Anyway, so that's what he's saying, and that makes sense. And so now we have to stop here and define shrewdness. This is what I found interesting. Shrewdness is defined as having or showing sharp powers of judgment and situational awareness. Being shrewd is not a bad word. He's just saying it's effective for the people that aren't Christians. How about employing that in your skill sets and see how far you can get, which is an interesting point. But even knowing that, we ask the question, okay, then what's the lesson? The answer is in verse 9, which is even more difficult to understand than verse 8. But he'll explain it. So let's just read verse 9. He says, "And I say to you, make friends for yourselves by means of the mammon of unrighteousness, that when it fails they may receive you into the eternal dwellings." Now verse 8, if I was told that, I'd have given tell me that one more time. If someone had told me verse 9 for the first time, I'd have to say, wait, back up. Back up the prodigal steward truck and explain that to me, because that doesn't seem to make any sense, except for the fact that the way he goes on to explain it. So here, at this point, Jesus kind of steps out of the parable and starts talking now to his disciples so that it makes sense to them. If your sons of light had the same shrewdness, the same sharp judgment, the same situational awareness as the other ones, then those sons would be in a better off situation. Second, use your worldly resources. What we have to consider unrighteous mammon is nothing more than money or wealth. This is in the sense that he's using it here. You can be just as smart with your money as the Christian son of light as the non-Christians can be with their money. Just not hoarding it for themselves, using it for the church, using it for the missions, using it for other brethren who need it. That's the difference. Use your worldly resources, use your spiritual shrewdness to make friends that way. And so then, as he says in the last part of that verse, so then even when that wealth is gone, just like the unrighteous steward, guess what? It doesn't matter. You've made a friend. You've given your money to somebody. You've given your wealth to somebody who needs it, to the church that needs it, to somebody who needs it. And that's kind of the comparison that he makes, which is, again, to me, a very unique comparison. So how do we do that exactly, other than those generalized suggestions I just made? How do we do that exactly? When Jesus told his disciples in Matthew chapter 10, verse 16, to go out and be shrewd as serpents, what did he mean? I'm going to give you a minute and go ahead and answer that for me. What did he mean? Think things through. Use what you know of the world. It's okay to know of things of the world, because we always tell ourselves, be in the world, not of the world. Did I say that right? I miss that sometimes. Be in the world, but not of the world. So basically he says it's okay to know these things. Just know how to navigate through them. Know when to run away. Know when to walk away. If Jesus didn't run away or walk away, he'd have been beaten up or killed long before the crucifixion ever came, but he just did some of the things that made sense, made common sense. You know what the world is, act as if you know what's going on. Use your situational awareness and use it for good and not for yourself. I mean, I think that's the basic message he's saying here, with a parable that really kind of sticks in your mind, because you got to struggle through 8 and 9 to have this make any sense. But it does after you get through it. Anyway, by the time we get to verses 10 and 13, we're at the point where, in one sense, this is a lesson about wealth and what people are willing to do to get that wealth, the risks. I mean, we see this on TV. People that mishandle money, mishandle people's investment funds. When you sit there and go, what were they thinking? Because you know what the result is before the news even comes on. You lose your family, you go to jail, there's terrible things that people are willing to risk for money. And I know we could come up with more examples. In another sense, it's a lesson on how to use what Satan thinks is his tool to be a tool for the spirits and the sons of light, which is God who was pointing out to us all along the way. Take the bad things and make them good. That's what God does for us. He sees the messes we get into, and he uses the bad things in our lives to steer us on the right road, if we're paying attention and if we're truly the sons of God. So now that we have that sort of squared away and that basic understanding, he concludes here basically with a word of wisdom. I would call it a platitude, but that's a negative connotation. With a word of wisdom and some very basic conclusions. He says, if you're faithful in a little bit of stuff, most likely you're going to be faithful in a lot of stuff. And conversely, if you're not even faithful in the little things, you're not going to be faithful in the big things, which defines the unrighteous steward. We already know what his past was. We already know he was unrighteous in little things, because look what he did when he got everything to be responsible for. I'm not even sure I'd want to be put in that situation. I'd love the trust, but sometimes the human nature of us takes over, as it does, or at least taught in this parable. And then he concludes with these 3 thoughts, which I love. If you're greedy with worldly riches, How can you be trusted with the true riches of God and of faith, or the money that you have that God gives you? I always like to say when I'm doing Lord's Supper, I sound like a robot sometimes, but I get to that part about giving, and I quote the Old Testament. God says, the gold and the silver are mine, because that's all we have to know. And what he's saying here is, how can you be trusted with something like that if you can't handle worldly riches? Number two, if you can't be righteous handling things that belong to others, how can you be righteous in the things that we would give to you? How would I trust you to give you something of your own if you can't take care of somebody else's stuff? We do that with our kids, right? You show me some chores. Show me you can take care of my stuff, and I'll start buying you more stuff. It's just a natural thing that we kind of teach our children that I think fits here. And then number three, he gives us the basic and most obvious. You can't serve two masters. You're going to love one, hate the other, hate one, love the other, and probably in most cases, you're going to love the wrong one, as in the case that we have here. You can't serve God and wealth. You can't serve God and mammon. You need both, of course, but you can only have one as a priority. And sometimes that's a tough thing we have to remind ourselves every day, Christian or not. I run into that myself personally. And stuff like this is what kind of brings me back, which I like. Okay, my last thoughts. We do this till 8. Plenty of time to chat. You're in good shape. First thing I thought of when I got to the end of this parable was, Jesus seems to take a long way around the campfire just to make a simple point, doesn't he? Doesn't it sound like that? I mean, you can't help it. You got to struggle through verses 8 and 9. Makes sense if you study a little bit, but he goes a long way around. But what has he achieved by doing that? I know what I've achieved, what I think he's achieved by doing that. What do you think he's achieved by telling us such a unique and complicated parable? Are you ever going to forget it? No. That's what I love about something. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. That's a good point. We are in constant conflict about what to do with our money. I think sometimes, I remember one of the comments I made was, there's a good reason to me that we don't give like they did in the Old Testament. Because to me in the Old Testament it was too easy. You got 10 pigs, you give one to the priest. You got 10 of this, you give one. You give 10% of everything, a couple other onesies and twosies in there, and you're good. We don't do that. What are we told? Give as you've been prospered. We get this real general, give as you've been prospered. Don't give so much that it hurts. If giving $100 makes you feel bad, I don't want your money. We're given the opportunity to review the blessings we have and make a decision. You can't give as a Christian, in my opinion, without reviewing the blessings that you have, because you have to calculate them. It's not 10% of this and 10% of this. You don't have to calculate any of that, really. It'd be nice if somebody said something like, okay, when you get your paycheck, after the taxes, after the speeding fines, after this and after that and after this, give 10% of what you got left and you're good to go. Wouldn't that be easy? Wouldn't that be fun? Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Well, that's a good point. We humans are very good at rationalizing. To your point, you know, are you going? Do you have $500 that you're going to give to the church this weekend? But I would have given them 500 had it not been for that car bill I just had to pay, because now I'm $200 short. So I'll pay the bill and I'll only give the church 300. I mean, that's maybe a silly example, but it's easy to rationalize and get yourself into this situation. Not full-blown unrighteous steward, but it's a slippery slope when you're not paying attention. Yes, ma'am.
I understood it differently.
Then your comments aren't welcome here tonight. I'm just, no. I'm messing with you. Go ahead.
No, when I always read it as, he never collected any of the bills. He let people get stuff and then they never paid bills. If you're familiar with the story, all Christians great and small, they never pay their bills. And they give this service out all the time. So I got the impression that he said, all right, I'll make it easy for them to pay their bills. We'll get a pressure on them. And the master was pleased because at least he's getting something back. And he offers him grace at the same time. I just understood it like the guy was so lazy.
Well, I mean, and I'm not saying it's not that way. And again, we're dealing with the parable and not what somebody might actually do. So in this case, you know, first of all, I think that if he was doing that, then the master would have found out by himself instead of having someone to tell him. If he wasn't giving him any money, the master would have come to him and said, "Where's the money?" But instead, I think my impression, and basically what I read, is he's doing what he did after the fact. He's skimming off the top. Master's not going to catch it right away, but somebody kind of comes in and tells him about it after the fact. Well, and again, that's because it's not the point. It's not the point of the parable. We could go digging into who this guy was and what he did and all this kind of stuff, but it's the parable that Jesus is using to say that was actually smart, that your shrewdness was good. I'm not so sure he was congratulating him because he was receiving money, unless I missed that. Does anybody else catch it that way? I don't think so, but what do you think?
Okay, so I don't think it was the master that was being ripped off.
Right.
I think he was ripping off the customers,
Yes.
and the master heard about that.
Right.
Okay.
But if the customers are being ripped off,
Customers are being ripped off.
the master's not going to get everything he wants.
Well, but the master's getting what he expects,
Uh-huh.
but the customers are paying more, and he's pocketing that. So when he goes back to the customer
Yeah.
and says, you know what, out of the kindness of my heart, I'm going to discount you by 50%.
Right.
Well, what he's actually doing is collecting what they should have been paying in the first place.
Right.
But the customer sees him as a really good guy. And, you know, I like this guy. Thank you. You really helped me out.
Yeah.
So if your master lets you go, you got a place over here.
Right.
Because you did me this great favor. Not realizing that he actually just charged
Yeah.
you should have charged you in the first place.
So, I mean, and maybe you go either way. I don't see the master as part of the conspiracy. Because anytime you're doing a parable, the master is usually what you're doing to God and how you're hurting God. It's normally the case. But, oh gosh, lots of hands. Yours was up first. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Yes. So either scenario, he's using the wealth for himself and not for somebody else was the point. Yes, sir.
Yeah, shall get the point. But to James' point, verse 1
Yes. Yeah. He was being short-sheeted. Yeah. And if he was in on the conspiracy, he wouldn't have fired him. Yeah. Right. Right. Yes. Right. Yeah. There's a parable perspective you always have to kind of keep in mind when you're reading through this, because you might stop and say, now, wait a minute. That doesn't really happen. Well, it's a parable. Listen to the story. Who else? Yes, ma'am. Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And there's a lot of different scenarios you can apply to it. Again, if you want to dig into this master's job, there's a lot of scenarios you can portray that would be squandering without necessarily stealing. You know, he may have gone out and bought 3 herds of pigs at the right price, something legally to be done, but the master would have said, don't waste my money on the pigs, I need cows. So he's just doing things on his own as if he's in charge of everything when he should be checking with the master. Yes, sir.
So when I read this, it's almost like a tax. The master is a land owner, and people live on his land, they don't pay taxes.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's saying, hey, I haven't seen any taxes in a while.
Right.
You must not be doing your job.
Mm-hmm.
Because the guy doesn't go to your his ledger and bring it to the master.
Yeah.
He goes to all the people and says, hey, how much do you owe? So he ain't been paying attention.
Right. Yeah.
And the guy goes, and so he's like, oh, you owe $100. I don't have to do how much you owe.
Yeah.
But because you said 100, I'm only going to ask for 50.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't have a clue how much you owed.
Yeah.
You told me 100, I told you a number less.
Mm-hmm.
So then now you're my friend.
Yeah.
Because I don't always tell the master either.
Right. That's right.
What he's done is he's forgiven debts.
Yeah. He's made friends.
Telling the disciples, go forgive debts that are owed to
God.
the master.
Right. Yeah. No, it's a real, by the time you're done with it, it's a real understandable comparison. And again, you can play around with what does he really do? What did he really do? But the base root words in there is the boss is getting cheated. And when he finds out and fires him, he's going to find another shrewd way to do something, which he did. And even though it's a parable, kind of clever, right? Because like he says, even when he makes the friends, it doesn't even matter whether he kept the money or not, because now he's made friends. Yes, sir. I'm trying to think of where, because Jesus certainly has said things like, it's like putting a camel through the eye of a needle and kind of stuff like that. What I read, my background on this is that it's that word, go out and make friends with mammon of unrighteousness that catches us, almost suggesting that he wants them to go out and do something bad. And I think that term is specifically only referring to these disciples were wealthy people, by the way. They had a lot of their own money. Yes, sir.
Yeah, he's kind of hit on the line of women. Those out here in house things that, and I don't know who or what the they are. Verse 9. So that when it fails today, who are the they or what are the they? Are the they the friends you made, or are the they that good deeds that you have done, the friendships that you built? Who or what are the they? Unless we answer that question.
Right. You're right. And so my assumption is that using money the way God wants you to, builds that Christian relationship so that, and again, it's tough to say they, I mean, it means you did good and you're going to go to a good place. It's tough to put the they in the... Right. Well, maybe well, it makes sense that wouldn't make sense that the people would take you into eternal dwelling, but the good deeds will take you into eternal dwelling. So I think that's a good point. That's a very good point. Say again?
It does make sense that he would have a job.
Yes.
So if the master was about to let him go,
Mm-hmm.
and he did these deals in order to secure his next position,
Mm-hmm.
so he wouldn't have to dig ditches up there.
Right.
Okay, so he was trying to say, okay, I messed up, I lost this job. How do I make sure that I have one to go to?
Right.
But he was networking.
Oh, he was networking. And again, used the same shrewdness to what he did. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. Yeah. And that's the assumption I make about the parable. We are the stewards. The master is God. It seems to kind of make more sense as we go through. And especially having to dig and pick out, like we just did here, about what exactly who's the they. Makes more sense now to me that the they is the good deeds that you would do with that worldly money than it would be the people you made friends with. They're not going to take you into eternal dwelling. Yes, ma'am. Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I know. It's a choice. It's always a choice. Mike? Okay. You sure? You going to ask me for money after the class?
No, but he says there in verse 13, he says you can't serve God.
Right.
So he's talking about money.
Yeah. Yeah.
He says here, you use this for righteous mammon so that they may receive you into eternal dwellings. Money's a tool. That's all money is.
Yeah.
And how are you going to use that tool? Are you going to get orders? You're going to have great vacations and own all great stuff and
Yeah.
cars? Or are you going to use that as a tool to help other people?
That's right.
We're supposed to be.
And like I said before, it's easy for us to rationalize that based on the money we have and what we do with it. So it's a good thing to remember. I want to close with this. When it's all said and done, we can talk about money, the steward, the master, all this kind of stuff. This parable is about choice. It's binary. It's one or the other. It's yes or no. And that has been a concept demonstrated throughout the Bible. Here's a couple of my favorites. Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 15 through 17. This is a great narrative that I recommend you take the time to read. But he finishes with this to God, to his people. I have put before you life and death. Pick one. Choose one. Choose life, he says, for the benefit of you and your children and your relationship with me. I give you two choices. You pick one. Joshua 24, verse 15. I know everybody in this room can quote this, right? Choose for yourself this day whom you will serve. It's a choice. Yes or no, one or the other. And it certainly applies to the gospel call. Luke said, or Mark said, Jesus said in Mark, he that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. He that believeth not shall be condemned. Choose. Pick one. You have to pick one. You tell somebody that verse, guess what? They have to pick one. It's binary. Has to be done. So it is about choice. And in this particular case is about what we do as we go through this world. The United States being very unique in this regard with the wealth that's in this country, what we do with our money and how we choose to separate what is we think is ours and what we choose to give for God. Anyway, appreciate your patience. Good class. Thanks for the comments. Does anybody owe me money?
Perfect and